appreciate that. I'm sorry about the technical glitch that happened. We apologize on behalf of the AP project. That's a strange occurrence that has not before happened. But at any rate, thank you for hanging in there. We had about a half hour to go, and we're at a good point. So if you can hang in with me for another about 25, 30 minutes or so, hopefully others will join. We'll just keep going. We had just finished talking about the steps within asset mapping and what it results in. We had gone through highlighting steps 2, 4, and 6, and I shared that this is an example of an asset map that highlights the specific assets through the different branches of the types of assets that they have here. And we were just moving into this chat, which was a strange place for what happened to happen, but a good place for what happened to happen, because I'm going to go with, it gave you 30 minutes or so to think about how you're going to approach the community asset mapping component of the 3-year plan. So if you can just take a moment and think about what we shared and highlighted a few moments ago and share, given this, how are you approaching the community asset mapping component of the 3-year plan? I'll give you a few seconds to start sharing your thoughts. And we are a smaller group now. I'm looking at the list of folks who are there. I'm, again, glad that were able to come back and join the group. I know several of you who did, and from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your hanging in as we get this webinar going and continue the work that we're doing around asset mapping. So Dana, as many brains and resources as possible, good, bringing in all of your stakeholders and giving each of the rep an assignment for their region. Perfect. That's a great way of looking at dividing and conquering and gathering as much input from all of those who are stakeholders as possible. All right, Eileen, professional development, highlighting a 3-year plan, and you're going to share some of the tools to see if we can include them in this workshop. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Gail, thank you. Gathering information for our schools areas, approaching staff members, perfect, because everyone is a stakeholder and is important to this work that we're doing. So as I said, I wanted to give you an overview of community asset mapping, but really to start making strong, direct connections to the work that you're doing with your 3-year planning. And so that's what we're going to move into now. And your 3-year planning you've been given several components that compose what I'm calling your toolkit for 2019 to 22. And that is, you were given the initial guidance that was shared with you in the fall. You were given the template that was shared shortly after that, and specifically sections 2.2 on the pre-planning and sections 2.3 on the planning really relate directly to community asset mapping. And then you also have the planning tool site, which has over 60 resources and highlights webinars that can be used to help you with your planning and asset mapping. And then your 3-year planning toolkit, and you'll see the link for that is provided here as well. And all of this leads us to June the 7th, which I know you're saying that date can't get here soon enough. You want to get your plan done and submit it and be done with this requirement that you have to complete. But I want you to think about it in terms of you only have until June the 7th to really do the work of getting to know your community, your region, your street by street view of what all the assets are that are available to help you do your work. And so specifically looking at each of these components, well, really the guidance and the templates, we're going to highlight where asset mapping falls in so that you can see those direct connections. So in your guidance in section 2.2, the pre-planning, there are some key pieces here. The first part under the directions talks about key partners and having those key partners really to help you think about what Table 1 requires, which is the entities that are going to be and that are providing education and workforce services in your region. What you'll see on these next several slides is there'll be several circles with numbers in them, and the numbers show the direct task and the connection to the step that's a component of the community asset mapping. So again, on page 5 and page 7 of the guidance, you'll see here step 4, which is where we're starting to identify the assets for the table, and the stakeholders, which is really part of 3. All that's a part of section 2.2. The bullet number or the circle number 3 also there says potential planning conversations include, and it asks you to convene with stakeholders. That is step 3 in your asset mapping. You're going to have to do it anyway, so do it the way that it should be done so that you get the best results for your community, for your consortia. And then step 2, where at the bottom of section 2.2 it says helpful questions to ask. Who provides education and workforce services to adults in your region? We already mentioned that under the critical questions. So that again speaks directly to asset mapping connections. Same thing as you look at the actual template under 2.2, you'll see the pre-planning assessment. The tool here, table 4 or table 1, the regional service providers, this is very, very similar to the mapping tool document that's listed as item number 2 that we shared earlier that you'll have as a tool to download. It asks you to identify the types of assets you want to identify, which is asset mapping step 4, to determine what your goal is, which is that gray area right under the broad part of the template where you get to, for your own writing and your own narrative, you can identify what the questions are that you're seeking to answer as a part of your pre-planning. I would certainly write that into the document. And then 6, where you're actually identifying the maps and the assets, if you look at table 1 as it's provided, it asks you to provide the description of the services provided. I think it was Marianne who asked that earlier, was wanting to know where do you provide the descriptions. And so this is where you provide it here, but it's built off of the notes section in your mapping tool, item number 2 that you can download. And then from the guidance, section 2.3, the community needs and customers, here you want to make sure that you are looking at page 7 in the guidance. This refers to part 4, step 4, where you're identifying the assets under 2.3. It also has the questions that you would ask. So again, we have identified questions earlier in the presentation that you shared, but here these are some of the critical questions that they're asking you to ask under 2.3. Again, they can be written into your narrative response, for your actual template with the answers to those as a way of framing what your narrative will look like. And then this whole section on community needs and customers really requires you to do step one, which is identifying the community that you're evaluating and looking at, and then starting to plot it actually on the map, which is step 6. And then the template component that relates to 2.3 is, or that relates to 2.3 in the guidance, is also 2.3 in the template. And again, thinking about this is where you get to provide your narrative. And what I've been told before is that you want to make sure that you use this for what works for you, that the reason that it is provided as a blank template is because we want you to have the freedom to include what you feel is most relevant. And again, this could be where you speak to the critical questions that you've chosen to address, where you include an image of the map as you've done your asset mapping. You can describe obviously what you found, which is number 6 in the asset mapping. You can write that into the narrative here too, or actually, again, put the image of what you found, your actual map. I see Marianne had asked again how to use that description piece, and that's where you can also write that here. So these are direct connections that speak to how asset mapping can be used to help you complete your plan and complete the task of doing the pre-planning as well. So we've talked a lot about asset mapping, the tools and the steps in it. And what I want to give you a moment to think about now are 3 questions. The first one is to ask you to consider, how are you currently gathering data for community asset mapping? What challenges are you encountering as you try to gather the data? Are you finding it hard to get stakeholders to actually do a street by street, or is it too much time? What are the challenges? And then how are you addressing the challenges? So you'll see 3 chats below the slide. If you can take a moment and share your thoughts on how you are gathering data, the challenges with gathering data, and how you're addressing those challenges. I'll give you a moment and then we'll talk about that. Good. Thank you for sharing that, CJ. Good. Thanks, Dana. And we are a much smaller and more intimate group now, so this is also your chance to really share honestly what's working for you and what challenges you're having as you're attempting to do this work. So please use this as an opportunity, again, given where we're at as a group now. I'll give you a few more minutes to share your responses. I'll give you some wait time. All right, so I see surveys, looking at labor market data, finding out how to get information from the stakeholders through existing meetings and the workforce regional meetings and through surveys, and then some monthly meetings where the stakeholders are invited. Great, thank you for sharing that. And then I, in terms of the challenges that you're encountering with gathering the community asset mapping data, um, Gail identified that one of the challenges is just needing to get guidance from the leaders within the consortium, from probably all of the members within the consortium as well. CJ, thank you for sharing. So the challenge for you was community outreach beyond our key stakeholders is limited. Yes, and sometimes the stakeholders that we think are the ones that should be the key stakeholders, they're only telling us part of the picture, and so it's a challenge to you don't know what you don't know. Oh, yes, and time. This work does take time, but ways in which you can balance that in terms of a solution to addressing that challenge of time is thinking about how you can make asset mapping actually fun exercises to delegate and learn about your community. I think one of the responses from an earlier chat was one of the approaches you would use is to really assign different parts of the community for folks to build relationships with and to sort of be ambassadors for those different areas within the region. Um, they get to take on a new responsibility and they own bringing in the relevant information about the assets within those areas because it's theirs. So good, good, good. I'm glad you like that idea. Um, all right, so I see Lionel typing, and we're going to be moving on to something that I think will give you an opportunity to think through a little bit more about, um, yes, so it has to be, you have to continue to maintain it. That is true. And that's a piece, as I said, you want to leverage work that you did when you did your needs assessment several years back, but understand that as the economy changes, those assets in the community also change. What existed 3 years ago might not exist now, and what exists now might look different 3 years from now. And so it is a constant need to stay in touch with and familiar with what the assets are that you are looking at in the community. I'm hoping that I'm going to move us into an activity that you will find fun and useful for your asset mapping work. I mentioned early on that we're going to be looking at a case study, and it's a consortium called Mawahil Adult Education Consortium. You can ask us later how we came up with that name. But this consortium, a little bit about it, it's a 6-member consortium, one community college district. There are 5 K-12 adult school agencies within this consortium. It's in a large suburban community with some strange pockets of rural that you wouldn't think would be there, but they are. And there are high concentrations of English language learners in the northern part of this consortium. I'm going to show you one of the ways in which I start doing asset mapping exercises, actually going to a map to see where it is, what I'm looking at, what the geographic area is. And so right now, you're going to be able to see what this map actually is. It's quite small, but maybe you can make it a little bit larger on your screen. That blue area there describes, or not describes, but shows the area of our map. And if you look north towards the mountain range there, that's that more rural area that we were describing. This is supposed to be pretend. Some of you might know where this area actually is. Um, if you do, just keep going with it and assuming it's our Mohiwa Adult Ed Consortium case study. As you see here, the population's almost a million. 3.7 is the average household size. The median income is $64,139. A pretty young community with the median age being 35. 1 in 4 don't have a high school diploma, and only 25% of adults do have the high school diploma. So again, when they say 1 in 4 don't, you want to think about that as that's covering the entire population, including children. 26% have some college, 22% have a bachelor's. Owner occupancy rate 60%, 59%. Then other household demographics that are here, 41% rental occupied homes, and then you'll see the total households in the middle. So my question for you, you've seen Mohilwa or Mawahil Adult Ed Consortium. You've seen some information about what it's composed of here, some demographics around it here. The question I have for you to think about as you think about community asset mapping for your own community is, what would be the best way, given what you've learned and what you know now, that Mawahil Adult Ed Consortium should use? What's the best approach that they should use to start community asset mapping, given what you've learned about them, how many members there are, their size, the demographics that you can find from that secondary data first run, which is what we talked about earlier. What would be the best thing that they should do to get started with their community asset mapping? And I'll go back to show you this slide so that you can think about it a little bit more. And there's no right or wrong answer. Just getting you to think about it, because this is your reality. When we get done with this webinar today, for those of you who haven't started yet doing your community asset mapping, you'll need to do that so that you can complete your plan. So if you were Mawahil Adult Ed Consortium, what is the best approach that they should use, that you would use to start gathering information on your community, to do your community asset mapping? I'll give you a few minutes to think through that and type in your responses. And I'm going to ask if everyone on the webinar can please participate in this piece, because it really helps all of us by having you think through this as a group. Help us benefit from your thoughts. All right, so I see several of you typing in things that you think they should do to get started with this process. Divide up the work either geographically or by asset type. I like the asset type approach. That might work. Um, we could also begin to define the services that are currently provided, good CJ, and consider what we want to do in the suburb area versus the rural areas because they have different ecosystems and systems of support in place. Good. Ask some of those critical questions, determine what they are for the consortium as a whole and maybe how they differ by the regional areas. Identify all the sub-regional demographics. Good, Gail. Thank you. Um, Begin by making the community assets in the north part of the consortia. Very good. Conduct survey and form a committee. Good. Thank you. Um, Good. What are the barriers keeping those who want a high school diploma from getting those? Very good, Eileen. Very good. You guys are getting this. This is excellent. So look closely at the folks who are without a high school diploma and determine what assets and areas and what are the barriers are for them. Perfect. Thank you all so much. You're understanding why we have to do this work and how you can do it in ways in which it doesn't have to be overwhelming, that you can look at different components of your consortia to gather the assets. If you think you know a lot about a particular area in your region already, you don't have to spend as much time there, but spend where you need to learn. Spend the time where you need to learn. All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for engaging in the input. So the last thing that I have for you as a tool is actually a community asset mapping checklist, and you can download this. It's item number 3, CAM checklist fillable. It gives you the steps that we've talked about within community asset mapping, the 6 steps that we've identified, and then the opportunity to check if you've completed it or not. And if not, you see on the far right, you can write down the notes, concerns, the when you're going to complete it. You can make this your timeline for each of those steps as well. So this is a tool, again, available for you to continue doing this work and hopefully help make sure that you don't miss any of the steps because they really build off of each other. So as I said when we started, the essence of community asset mapping really covers these 3 pieces: discover, ask, and connect. And if we're all in education, so we kind of know what a KWL is, and we use that in our classrooms with students. Well, instead of thinking about a KWL, know what learned, you can think of this instead as a DAC, discover, act, connect. Discover is what did you learn in the process and what do you want to learn in the process, but what did you learn? And then ask is the questions, what did you ask, what questions were asked, and then the connect, how were connections, and in this case in particular, made to the guidance and the template for your planning. So what have you discovered? What critical questions did you decide to ask, and what connections have you made with the work that you need to do for your planning and pre-planning? DAC, discover, act, connect. I want to leave you with that along with some resources to help support your asset mapping efforts. These will show you some other opportunities to dig deeper into asset mapping. Then I want to also make sure that you remember that next week is part 3 of our mini series. It will be on the 29th, a week from today. It's 3-year planning. Where do we go next? And both myself along with Sudie Whalen and Greg Hill, which for those who didn't guess and we're trying to figure out the Mawahil, we kind of put our last names together to come up with the Mawahil Consortium for you. I hope that you're able to join us next week in the final piece of this webinar mini series. This one will be available for you in a recorded session that has both halves blended together. So thank you again for those folks who were able to join us in the second half. And we want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have about this webinar that I can answer in the next few minutes. And then I think we'll be wrapping up. So if you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, please type them in the general chat. I want to remind you again to download the webinar as well as the 3 resources and tools that were there. And when you go to look for all of our resources, this is where you will find them on the AP TAP website, and you can begin to find this webinar as well as other recorded webinars here with the screenshot that you see below. So thank you again very much. Really, truly thank you for coming back for those who rejoined us. And we hope that you found this valuable. If you need anything, if you have any further questions, want to reach out, you can always contact me at cmore@air.org. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and again, thank you for your time. And I'll hang here for a little while as you ask questions or share any final thoughts. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Sharice, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, or should I say rejoining. We do apologize for the technical difficulties that we did experience earlier. However, the resources that are available in the pod to the left of your screen will be available on the California Adult Education website later on this afternoon. I have posted the URL of exactly where these resources will be located. We will work on the recording to merge the first half of the webinar in the second half so that the website will have a one complete recording of the webinar. And in addition, we will send out the second half of the webinar to participants who attended today's session, whether you rejoined or were not able to. Everyone will have access to the second part. So if you missed it, you will have access to it at a later time. Once we close the webinar room, if there are no additional questions, the evaluation will appear on the screen. I would like for everyone to please complete the evaluation and let Sharice know what you thought about today's webinar, its content, the resources that were available, and the conversations that took place during the webinar, and any additional feedback that you may have, or if you are in need of additional professional development around community asset mapping or the 3-year planning process. Sharice, I'm not seeing any additional questions.
Hear from Dana on how exhaustive or detailed does a map have to be. And it doesn't have to be detailed. It's up to you what your critical questions are that you're looking at, because that will determine the type of assets that you want to focus on as you're doing your getting to know your region and getting to know your community, getting to know your consortia. If you're planning to include it as a visual within your plan, that's one of the reasons I shared the example earlier with the tree branches. You can use something like that to actually show your map like this, or you can actually use the mapping tool and show what you actually did, and you can add to that columns if you'd like to show new assets identified or things that you knew about already. You can be creative, and then you can actually place a physical map too if you want it to do that too. It's up to you. The thing that Neil has shared several times is they don't want you to feel restricted in how you report what you're including in your plan and how you share and describe that. So I hope that answers your question. And again, thank you all very much. It can look like this as an example. Perfect. All right. Thank you. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and thanks for coming back. I appreciate you all. Bye-bye.
All right, have a great day, everyone.